There's some elected officials in the room, county supervisors, city council members, mayors, and I want to thank you for your stewardship and the dedication to housing. What each of you do is vital to the future of housing in this region, and I know that they know that. I know that you know that you're the ones that are on the front lines of making this a reality. I also want to thank the Housing Collaborative of the Central Coast for making this event happen. I know this is not the first. I think it's really intentional, and I think it's really important. It represents the summit and all that you're talking about, and I got to hear a little bit of the end of the last panel. It represents a critical moment for us to come together as collaborators. That's what we are, all focused on creating real housing opportunities and solutions. And so I know that today we're not just talking about the current state of housing. You're looking ahead 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Now I'm going to offer here that had we been building enough units per year of housing in the last 30 years, we would have more naturally affordable housing today. That's the impact of not building year by year. And year by year, we have built fewer and fewer units of housing. Some of this is about supply and demand. There's many other issues, but a lot of it is supply and demand. So we know that we must remember that the decision we make today will have an enduring impact on our future and future generations. I was especially excited to be able to give the keynote today. Housing has always been one of my top priorities. It's profoundly and deeply personal to me. I grew up in rural Appalachia, where my parents worked tirelessly to make ends meet. My dad was a lead miner, my mom was a seamstress in a factory, and we lived paycheck to paycheck in a home without running water and an outhouse. I know firsthand how crucial access to safe, secure, and affordable housing is to the overall quality of life. And housing isn't just about having a roof over your head, it's about dignity. It's about stability. It's foundational to our very humanity. And I learned that personally as a kid who would go to school and have other kids make fun of me. You know, they were rural too, by the way, but you know how we can be, would make fun of me because I had an outhouse and no running water. My sister and I would carry water from a spring, not even a well, a spring, to drink, to bathe, and to cook. And you know, that is something that I've never forgotten as I've entered elected office, policy work as a public servant. Now, what we've seen in California and throughout the country is just what you heard at the end of that panel. I came in on it as one of the young women was talking about. Affordable housing is increasingly out of reach. Many of our young people, and she looked like one of our young people, hamstrung by economic challenges and a very competitive market. They've abandoned their dreams of home ownership from 31% to 15%. Many can't even afford rent in cities and towns where they grew up. As a result, they're moving to less costly areas of the state, or they're leaving California altogether. And of course, too many are priced out of the housing market entirely, and are pushed into homelessness. It's a profoundly humanitarian issue. We often hear the words housing and crisis used together. But why do we wait to take action until something becomes a crisis? To me, good governance has always been about leading and taking initiative before things spiral out of control. That's how I led as a city council member in San Diego, as the Assembly Speaker and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and it's how I'll continue to lead in public service with each and every one of you. But before I became the Speaker of the Assembly, I was in local government. I ran for the Assembly because I wanted to work on housing policy. I wanted to be chair of the Housing Committee in 2011. I wasn't made chair of the Housing Committee, and at that time, though, it wasn't a position anybody wanted. So the fact that I didn't get it is still a mystery to me, but I saw it as an opportunity to get ahead of the housing challenges that we were facing and the looming crisis that would follow if we didn't act. I didn't end up as that committee chair, as I said, but I did become the Speaker, later became the Pro Tem, the leader of the Senate. One of my very first priorities was setting an agenda that would include real, bold housing solutions. And it took a few years to find some folks that wanted to do that work. And it really took the media, frankly, acknowledging that we had a crisis, for policymakers to begin to take seriously what we needed to do. So as we put together an agenda working with some housing advocates, first, after years of work, I was able to pass SB 2. It took a 2/3 vote in each house to create an ongoing permanent source of funding for affordable housing, subsidized housing, affordable housing. That was a 7-year endeavor. And I wasn't the one that started it. Another senator did, and eventually he went to Congress, and I moved up and took up the banner to get SB 2 done. As pro tem, after previously unsuccessful attempts to reform our local zoning rules, I brought together a diverse coalition of legislators to find a solution that was bold but could also get the necessary votes. And Jocelyn made reference to SB 9 that we passed in 2021, a law that allows homeowners to create a duplex or subdivide their property to create up to 4 units. The bill wasn't just about increasing housing supply, it was about empowering people to maximize their land and be part of the solution to our housing supply crisis by providing personal economic incentives to create more housing. The bill was never intended to be an overnight solution, and that's why the arguments that opponents put forward, and some of you may be opponents to SB 9, I recognize that, but I would just say the opponents put forward arguments that really haven't come true. Not every homeowner will choose overnight to create a duplex or subdivide their lot, but over time, the law will be used more and more as families look for opportunities to also create generational wealth. I know this bill wasn't universally popular, but it was the first step in needed reforms to land use policy. And making tough, sometimes unpopular decisions is required. Support isn't built overnight either, and I think many of you that work in this area know that. Our coalition brought everybody to the table, everybody that would listen and would come. Democrats, Republicans, communities, individuals, businesses, and consumer advocates. And given the room I'm in, I do want to give a shout out and say thank you to Cal Chamber and chambers that came on board to support this, as well as the Realtors Association in California for supporting SB 9. We forged compromise, we listened to concerns, and we worked towards solutions that would be mutually beneficial. And that's how I've always thought we should work, from the earliest days as a staff member to a city council member, as a council member, working with community. And that's how we should all be leading in this space. You know, housing is a complex issue. There's no simple soundbite here. It doesn't exist. And solving it is going to require collaboration, open dialogue, sometimes strange bedfellows, but it's through the process that we find the right solutions. And that's at the heart of this summit. We're not just talking about today's challenges. Again, we're setting the stage for the next 30 years. Our biggest charge, our biggest challenge, we must continue to work to make sure that California is an even better place to live, grow, buy a home, and where our kids and our grandkids have access to that same promise. I told you, I got to California 40 years ago, San Diego, and California gave me every opportunity. It was my path to the middle class. I was able to buy a home. My parents never owned a home. And I just think that's the promise we have to make to our families, our kids, and our grandkids. But to get there, we're going to need mutual understanding, tough conversations, and a willingness to compromise. And I'm confident. In fact, I know it, I've seen it, that together we really can shape a future where housing is not a crisis, but the solution. I want to thank you for your time. I didn't want to speak long because I was told we could have a dialogue and that we could have a real discussion. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. And I think I'm going to be joined on stage by Karima, and I'm looking very much forward to her questions, as well as your comments, your questions, and your thoughts on solutions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Again, my name is Ermina Karim. I'm so thrilled to be able to have this conversation. It's all good. It's a tough one. It's not the worst I've been called, I can say that.
You and I share that.
Well, I really sincerely appreciate you sharing, and it's been evident through your work, your commitment to housing affordability and housing access. I really appreciated your comments around being pro-people and sharing some of your own personal background that has shaped your commitment to housing. So let's dive deep into some of what you just raised in your comments. As you noted, our housing crisis has been decades in the making, and you've been a strong proponent, SB 9, SB 10, SB 2. So SB 9 allows homeowners to build additional units on single-family lots. SB 10 lets cities approve denser housing near transit. And SB 2 provided, as she pointed out, a permanent funding source for affordable housing. So looking back on those policies, which has had the greatest single impact, and based on what you know today, what shifts would you make to those policies?
Well, I don't think any one piece of legislation can solve any problem. It is a package of ideas and pieces of legislation and budget and funding that needs to happen. 25 years ago, I was in a room with the building industry and affordable housing folks, and the affordable housing folks are saying we need more money, we need more money. And we did, and we do, particularly if you want to build subsidized housing for lower income. And the builders are saying we need streamlining, and they were right, we do. We need all of those things. So anytime someone tries to put us in a corner to say, give us that one magical piece, that one thing that can do it, it's impossible. It's going to take all of these things. I would say when I got to Sacramento in 2011, there was no interest in doing housing legislation. I'd come out of local government, interested to do this work, and I kept saying, we're going to have a problem. We're going to have a problem. We were seeing it in San Diego. And I would say it's a package of bills, and I have to call out Nancy Skinner from the Bay Area, who's one of the smartest strategic people on policy and finance, along with a number of folks. We have seen the increase of legislators, and it's because we've got problems in our communities. Nobody can find a place to rent or buy, and the prices. So, I lament the fact that, government typically steps in when government has to step in instead of being proactive. But I think it's a package of bills. I think it's resources and money, and within that package of pieces of legislation, you can do ordinances also. I mean, ordinances at the local level, legislation at the state. Really, it's going to take all of those things in order for us to move the needle forward. But once we do it, then we've got to move with intentionality and focus and really get it done. And within that package of bills, I want to make sure you understand some of that is streamlining. Time is money, and we need to be able to build more faster. So I would say it's a package of bills, and we really need to be implementing, because there is no one magic bullet, to use a politically incorrect phrase.
Well, I guess let's go to streamlining then, and I think a conversation topic that everybody in this room, many of the people in this room care deeply about. We've certainly seen the state move to cut red tape in times of crisis, like we're seeing currently, fast-tracking CEQA approvals after the devastating LA fires. And when you were on the San Diego City Council, the city proactively streamlined CEQA for downtown housing, reducing delays and uncertainty. So if we can apply that kind of flexibility in times of crisis, why not move to solve our ongoing housing crisis in a similar way?
We can, but I'm going to say it also takes a lot of work, and you hear that phrase, I hate all these simple phrases, the devil is in the details and how you do it. When you mentioned we did it in downtown San Diego, actually I'm going to say there was kind of a magic bullet. It was called redevelopment. And the downtown San Diego used redevelopment. My spouse Jennifer is here. She was on the redevelopment board in San Diego. And, it was an agreement between the redevelopment agency put in place by the state, implemented at the local level, and it really was an agreement with developers. And there was an economic development component too, but there was an agreement with developers. We will help the process go quicker and streamline it if you in return do some public benefit and good, and that was low-income, affordable housing, and first-time homebuyer programs as well. So that was the exchange. So it absolutely can be done. And if we look at what was recently done, Governor Newsom with the emergency declarations and the orders around CEQA for rebuilding, but also Coastal Commission because Palisades is in the coastal zone, I would just say we can do it, and we should be doing more of it. But I'm going to say particularly because I'm at the Central Coast, our coastline is important. So we can build appropriately, but we also don't want to overdevelop along our coastline, take away access. I don't want to offend any city, but we don't want to Miami-ize the coastline of California. I don't think, I mean, if you do, I didn't think so. Much like San Diego, but I do think there are ways that you can look at policies, that it can be more friendly, and that you can do it and protect communities at the same time you're building necessary housing. I will tell you some of this because we've had our run-ins with the Coastal Commission in San Diego. But at the same time, we had a piece of property when I was on the city council that the Housing Commission owned in La Jolla, and they wanted to build affordable housing. Jen, it was Fay Avenue, remember? Fay Avenue. Ultimately, that affordable housing never got built because the community did not want low-income housing in their community. And they used the Coastal Commission in order as a leverage. See, we got to quit doing that. We got to quit using CEQA and the Coastal Commission and processes that are there. Those processes are in place for real protections, for environmental protection, for other types of things where there is community process and input. They're not there to be used as weaponized tools to stop development just because you don't want density or you don't want those kind of people there. I've seen all of that in my 30 years. And I know, the local elected officials here, everybody needs to be supportive of elected officials at the local level. Whether we're talking city council, supervisor, regional bodies that exist in governance to do transportation, housing, all of that stuff, we need to support them because the reason developments don't happen, and let's just assume they're good developments, the reason developments and density many times don't happen is because the elected official will lose their spot on the council if they vote for controversial projects. So it takes a lot of work to get these things done, but we should not be using CEQA or the Coastal Commission to keep development from happening, and there should be a quicker process to do these things.
Well, I appreciate that. If there was, and clearly by the audience reaction they do as well, if you had the magic wand, what's one CEQA reform that you would prioritize instantly?
Well, I don't think there's one. I think...
That's true. But if you had to.
Well, someone's going to give me, before I leave here, I'll get a couple of examples, but I think, what matters to you. But I think the whole reason we did pieces of legislation like AB 900 that then I did the reauthorization of it was to streamline and cut the process for that opportunity for people to try to stop the project, to sue. We cut the days down. But CEQA is a whole list of items, and there was a thought that one legislator was going to try to look at CEQA reform a number of years ago, and now Buffy Wicks is doing town halls up and down the state to try to talk about how to streamline and do things faster. And we are going to have to change some of those regulations if people really want housing to be built, and that means conversations are going to have to be had in communities all over about why is it you don't want this project built. I mean, if there's real reasons it should not be, and I've seen some pretty bad developments, I'm sure some of you have as well, but we got to separate these things out and get the work done, because the young woman that was speaking when I came in is never going to be able to find an affordable rental if we don't start making true these conversations. And it gets hard. I mean, I remember sitting on a city council. Every Tuesday we did planning, or we did the applications for development services and planning. We called it Development Services Planning Tuesday, and everybody came, because I guarantee you there was not one single project for approval that didn't have 100 people in support and opposition. And usually the opposition was more than the support.
Isn't that the truth? So let's talk about this tension, because it absolutely exists between state mandates now, which have enabled housing in many places to occur, versus local control and this ongoing tension in housing policy. And some of the policies the legislation you helped move forward has been to be able to accelerate the ability for housing to occur. So how do we strike the right balance between state leadership and local decision making? And are there ways to enforce the laws that without the constant legal battles that slow things down?
I wish that were the case. We live in a society that believes everyone has a right to make a case. And I think, to the point I made before, we've taken it too far. We've allowed law to be able to use to weaponize and litigate. But I would say this: there is no shortcut for hard conversations that need to be had about how to build and where. And again, I went through this in San Diego. I was on the city council, the first in the nation to declare a local state of emergency on housing. I was highlighted in Governing Magazine for the person that pushed an emergency declaration for housing. Every 2 weeks, we had to reauthorize that emergency declaration, and my council colleagues just loved me, because I would sit there and go down every development that I was aware had happened in the last 2 weeks to say either why this was good, we're now seeing things happen, or we're not doing enough. And we bonded that redevelopment that we had that was so important. We had always bonded, many of you may know this, bonded redevelopment dollars, but we never bonded the housing money of redevelopment. 80% was economic development and development, 20% was set aside for housing. I convinced our council, to bond against the set-aside, the housing set-aside. We were able to build many more houses quicker. So that was great. I pushed and got inclusionary housing passed in San Diego. We supported Prop C. At that time, Prop C was money for housing. And so I was able to do all of that. But I will tell you, I spent hours and hours and hours at all of my local community planning committees. I get to the state, I pass SB 9, or I get it passed. That was the third attempt, though. SB 9 was a very modest version of what that bill started out as. Scott Wiener from San Francisco proposed, I've forgotten the number, and the first bill. Then the second bill was SB 50, and it didn't get the votes to pass. And I convened a group of legislators after SB 50 failed. I convened legislators from all across the spectrum of geography in California to put together, and we came out with SB 9. So I would just say it is important. Local is important. I come out of local government. I understand how important that is. But when communities are not building the fair share of housing for their own residents, that becomes a problem. And people, need a place to rent or live. And I think that I've had more than one city council member come up to me and say, well, either they're mad at me and they're screaming at me, or they're saying, thank you for doing that, because if you hadn't done that at the state level, we wouldn't be able to do some of the things we're doing. Not just on SB 9, really on some of the others, because SB 9 was gentle density over time. The reason people went crazy is because it was also labeled the end to single family zoning. So the moniker was way more serious than the practical impact. But I mean, this is the hard discussion. How do you do this in your community in the appropriate way?
Let's move to what you've already been touching on, and we heard in our prior panel on affordability. So there's many of us who believe that, and it's clear that affordable housing is a societal need, and many who state support for it. And yet the funding sources remain pretty limited, largely tied to federal tax credits or fees and requirements placed on market rate development. So given the scale of the housing crisis and your deep understanding on exploring funding mechanisms, what can California be doing to expand affordability without overburdening the private sector?
Mm-hmm. We've got to implement these pieces of legislation that we've passed. We need to be building. We need to be building using the tools that we have. We do need more resources to build subsidized housing. And I would say also resources. I proposed, and we got it in the budget, to do the California Dream for All, which is 20% down payment. And we put $300 million in. It was gone in 11 days. 11 days. So people still want to buy. And that 20% down payment, that really impacted the mortgage interest deduction, all that, the interest that you pay. We had to put another $200 million in. I would like to continue to fund that. That at some point becomes a revolving. The money is paid back, and it can be used to help other people. So we do need to put resources into it. We do need to work on streamlining even more than we have. And I think we'll, use a crisis in which to figure out how to use some of what we learn in the midst of crisis to scale it. What we're seeing in LA and what we're going to have to do in LA. I mean, remember, Paradise went through this. Paradise happened, and it's taken a decade to, and they still haven't rebuilt the way that they would like. Just imagine what that's going to be like in Los Angeles. But I think we take what we have learned as we go through this, and we apply it, and we scale it, and we make it bigger. And we have put a lot of money into housing in California, a lot. If only money were the only problem, frankly. I mean, with the federal money we get, the state money, we have many sources. The SB2 was just one source. We have the Strategic Growth Council, cap and trade money. We have the federal dollars. We should be worried about the federal dollars right now. But we've put lots of money into it, but we really have got to get serious about building on the ground. And we will, I'm not there now. I'm not a senator. Thank you for introducing me as a senator. I am out of office now. But I know that the work that Buffy Wicks is doing on the town halls and ideas for streamlining, she's very serious about moving this forward, and I think now is time. I think we're all ready for that to happen, and particularly in the face of wildfires and what we're up against. I know that we're going to turn action into reality, but we need the support. We need supportive community. We need people to be vocal and verbal about moving forward and doing this, because you talk about how do we stop, how do we make this go quicker. We've got to do the conversations to get community support for this.
Well, I can see that we're winding down on time, so I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and then try to get to a real speed round. Okay. So as you've referenced here, housing isn't just a professional focus for you, it's a shared passion in your household. Your spouse, Jen Lassar, is a housing policy expert. How has that influenced your thinking on solutions, and are there any debates at the dinner table about the best way forward?
She is the expert. I was an advocate when I was on the city council. One day she said to me, if you're going to be a housing advocate, you actually need to understand finance and performance and the ability to help make it a reality. And so, I'm serious about that. I wanted to see solutions. So, we hardly ever have dinner together. But I will say, when we lost redevelopment, that was the most horrific thing in the state. I mean, redevelopment might have needed to be reformed a bit, and there was lots of discussions about how to reform it. But it really was, to use that phrase again, redevelopment really was one of the magic bullets. It was absolutely, because it was a form of financing that we were able to use and leverage. And when the courts ruled against both the Redevelopment Association and the state, we all lost. The minute that went to court and became an issue for the courts to decide, we lost all control. And so we lost redevelopment, and we have since been trying to figure out how to refinance it. But I think, you know, the housing is foundational to everything else. Whether you're able to get a good job, get an education, deal with medical issues. You know, some of the homeless people we see on the streets are struggling with, not all, but many, mental health issues, drug, alcohol addiction. You know, they can't be on the road to recovery if they don't have housing, a foundation. So I do believe that if we are intentional and we are serious about making sure our kids and our grandkids will stay in California, then we have got to make this happen. We've got to commit ourselves. And it isn't just about that, it's about the economy. California's economy is going to continue to suffer if we don't figure out how our people can be housed affordably.
Well, I can't let you out of your seat without acknowledging, as was said in your introduction, that you are running for governor. The gubernatorial race is certainly heating up, and if you are elected, you would be our first woman and first known LGBTQ governor in California. So beyond the very significance of housing, what are your, name 2 other top priorities to accelerate opportunity in this great state?
Well, gosh, there are not only 2, but you said rapid, so I'm just going to say I know all of the challenges. I also know all of the opportunities. Housing is number 1. It really is. It's foundational. It's number 1. We've got to address it. We have got to address other affordability issues, energy, water. Those are the costs. Housing, energy, water, those are the costs that keep people from being able to afford to live here. We've got to address that. And then I'm going to say healthcare, and we've got to really focus on our educational system and make sure that we're continuing to lower the cost to get a higher education. Whether it's community college, CSU, UC, any other college, we've got to really focus on that, because that is also about our economy, and it's about, you know, that is how California leads. So. And there's many, many other things.
Okay, well, I think we've got at least 2 more minutes left, so I can go to speed round. So let's do kind of 30-second answers. If you had a magic wand, I know you're going to hate this question.
I wish I had a magic
and could fix one part of the housing system overnight, what would it be?
Well, I mean, it's got to be, well, I gave you lots of answers. We need to implement, but we also need to look at our funding mechanisms and how we have so many different forms of funding, and we've got to streamline that. Because as developers, you're trying to piece together one source of funding, so we've got to tackle that.
Great. Favorite city in the U.S. that's getting housing right, and why?
Oh my. If you'd stop favorite city, and I was going to say Bakersfield.
Or housing.
I was not kidding on the Bakersfield thing. Don't go tell people I was making fun of Bakersfield. I love Bakersfield, you know, the Bakersfield sound. One, getting it right. There are some great cities doing wonderful things. I think San Jose has started to do some things. Sacramento, they're building more. What they're doing is building. And I don't want to take away from anyone. San Diego's doing some great things. But I think one of the things I enjoyed was visiting Vienna, which has been on the list for I don't know how many years, as the most affordable place to live. I mean, they see housing as a right. They really see it as a right. And the social housing model that they have is something I think that many people in California are starting to look at and to try to implement in their communities. So I think anyone that's seriously engaged, any city that's getting units of housing built, they deserve the credit, because it's not easy to do.
All right, I see a chamber trip. Bakersfield or Vienna. Okay, what's a book, podcast, or thinker that has most shaped your views on housing or leadership?
You know, I have to say, Jennifer, you have done that. And that's because she reads all the books. But I will tell you, one of the books that in the last couple of years that really hit me was Evicted. If you haven't read Evicted, and there's a couple of others. But Jennifer, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your leadership from city council forward to our state. It has had a profound difference in our communities, and we wish you the best of luck as you move forward.
Thank you. Bill Council.